Welcome to the Overcommitted Podcast, where we discuss our code commits, our personal commitments, and some stuff in between. I'm your host this week, Bethany, joined by...
Hey, I'm Erika. And hey, I'm Brittany Ellick.
The three of us met while working on a team at GitHub and quickly realized we were all obsessed with getting better at what we do. So we decided to start this podcast to share what we've learned. We'll be talking about everything from leveling up your technical skills to navigating your professional development, all with the goal of creating a community where engineers can learn and connect. Today on Overcommitted, we're thrilled to welcome Rick Turoczy, a Portland ecosystem veteran who spent 3 decades in the trenches with startups. Rick doesn't just support startups, but builds the founders behind them. Rick, we're so glad you're here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really honored that you chose me, especially that I'm like a hobbyist developer at best. So hopefully I can hold my own. Let's not get too technical here.
No, that's amazing. I am so excited, especially just with all the work you've done within your community and stuff. Super excited to discuss some more of how you think about things like that and how you support founders. So let's dive in. Wanted to start with just generally, how did you get started in the Portland tech startup scene? Were you always interested in technology, or did it come later? Would love to know some of your background.
Yeah, happy to do. Yeah, Portland, pretty accidental, quite frankly. It's like a series of happy accidents kind of thing. I used to be a very, very good developer in BASIC on a TRS-80 when I was like in 5th grade, back when you still had to press like play and record to save your files. But I continued to just kind of remain a hobbyist and involved in technology, but went to school, got a degree in English, wound up moving to Portland, and it was just really a random opportunity with a company that was hiring for an editor and copywriter that happened to be this thing called a startup. And I didn't know what a startup was, or like that. I mean, I realized people started companies, but I didn't know that like you joined companies that were still at their formative phases. And my initial role kind of quickly transitioned from being a copywriter to being the guy who built pitch decks all day, every day for the founding team, and then continued to grow and learn about the organizations, and kind of wound up following a few executives around to new startup gigs. So for about 12 years, I was just bouncing around from startup to startup, all venture funded, all tech companies here in Portland. And then, thought I'd learned enough to do a company on my own. So tried that a couple times and was just like, no, I'm not a founder. I'm like really good tactical support for visionary founders, but I'm not that visionary person. So kind of was spending a lot of time in the open source community, and because that's where a lot of the startup activity was coming out of. This is about 2005 or so. So it's at the point where open source is now being adopted by corporations and proprietary software pursuits. And at the same time, cloud infrastructure is becoming a real thing. So it's like this perfect storm of just like things that used to take us a room full of engineers and a room full of servers were suddenly being built in a matter of weeks or months by a handful of developers. And I just found that super interesting. And so again, didn't have enough technical acumen to contribute to any of those projects, but I was like, I'll just open source my marketing communications. And so I just started writing about what I saw happening in the community. And I'd blogged since the like previous century, when you used to have to write code to put words on the internet, and so I didn't expect it to be anything. I was just like, this will be my personal journal, keep track of what's going on. And for whatever reason, it struck a chord. So people started sending me stuff, and they're like, write about our startup, tell people about our event, and all those kind of things. So that's really how it started. And now it's been 18 years of what is basically now a bad habit of writing about what's going on in the Portland startup community.
I can see maybe some of the magic that you have. My cookbook, I think I laughed about like 3 times reading the first paragraph. So yeah, the joy comes through and is in sort of contagious. Yeah, it's contagious.
That's very kind of you. Yeah, and that's my one and only GitHub repo that's had any traffic whatsoever. Is we just used it to write documentation for one of our programs, and that was a really interesting experiment as well.
Yeah, I was definitely a big fan of your philosophy on open sourcing, your thoughts around startups and what makes a good founder. And I think honestly, more of that is so needed. especially it was a wealth of information. It was really cool. Potentially related, but would you say your background in English has set you up for given you a lot of skills for your future with startups, or how has that interconnected? I mean, even maybe more than just writing.
Yeah, that's a great question. It was a small liberal arts college that I went to, and I think if I learned one thing there, it was actually how to learn, how to not be afraid of a new topic, and how to embrace the learning around that topic. And that has probably been the thing that's most valuable. I think in that system, you wind up juggling a lot of topics, and you're like, inch deep, mile wide on any number of subjects, but have to pretend you're expert in them. And I feel that that works really well for especially early stage startup founders who are kind of pretending they know what they're doing or trying to kind of fake their way through stuff. And like, I still talk to my alma mater and other small liberal arts colleges, and they're kind of having a crisis of confidence right now. They're like, oh, we don't have a CS program, or like, we're not teaching business acumen or those kind of things. And I'm always trying to remind them that, like, if you teach people how to learn effectively, then that's really, an asset that people are going to be able to put to use regardless of what they pursue. So I think it was really that. And it was one where you were almost forced out of your shell to explore new topics. Like, that was part of the requirement, was making yourself a well-rounded individual in terms of the educational perspective. So I think all of those things were really, really helped contribute. And then specifically from just an English perspective, like, it's kind of like we've talked about a little bit, like just putting stuff in common English and not using acronyms or lingo, or like just being basic and explanatory, can sometimes be hugely valuable in our industry. People get really used to talking in code or lexicon that does not resonate with a regular individual. So I found it's really helpful for me to be able to like convey that stuff in standard English, or it forces me to ask questions where I'm like, what do you mean by that? Like, I don't understand. How would I explain that to somebody else? Like, that's been helpful as well.
That definitely makes sense, especially if you're a founder trying to ask for money or interest in your product. You need to be able to convey very concisely and crisply what it is you're selling. So that definitely makes sense. So with regard to, you said you moved to Portland after college, was there anything that drew you to Portland as a community, and what sets it apart from other areas that are more typical for tech startups like Silicon Valley?
Great question. Yeah, I was a huge fan of Portland. Like, before I moved here, I was a dumb jock. Like, I played sports all through school. And so even in high school, wound up over here playing sports quite often. And then in college, I was here a lot. And I really enjoyed my college experience. But, when I graduated, most of my graduating class was moving to Seattle. And I was like, kind of done with college. I kind of need to move on to that next phase of my life. And so Seattle was close to Portland. That was one of the compelling things, was it was close enough to kind of stay in touch with friends. And the other part was, I'd grown up all over, but my high school years were in a small rural town. And so Portland had this compelling, like, small townish mentality, even though it had a larger metropolitan culture available to it. And I found that really compelling about the community. I think in the time that I've been here, so I moved here in the mid-90s, so 30 years. And in the time that I've been here, like, it's come into sharp relief that Portland has this really interesting, I refer to it as like aggressive humility. Like, the people here are really smart and really creative, but they don't self-promote. They don't brag about it. They're just kind of, this is just a thing I do. I do this little thing. And then you find out later they're like the CEO of $1 billion company or something. And it's like, I love that part about it. It's super charming. And I think it also lends to, because people aren't living to work, like they might be in the Bay Area where it's like work or your startup is the be all and end all. I think, people have more pursuits and creative outlets, and like they're interesting, well-rounded people that always makes for compelling just communities and engagements and people you get the chance to chat with. I think Portland is a unique place on the West Coast, especially when it comes to technology. Like, for somebody who's worked in tech in Portland for 30 years, I'm not sure it's really a tech town. Like, I think we've kind of made a run at it a few times, but that might not be the most compelling ecosystem for us. And I think, as the West Coast culture has kind of become more homogenous, like 80% of the culture on the West Coast is the same, regardless of where you're located physically. If you're in San Diego or LA or Seattle or Portland, like, you get good food, you have access to the outdoors, like all that kind of stuff. And it tends to be those more specific aspects of the community that tend to attract people. And so I think there's almost a selection bias for Portland. Like, if you're really hard charging startup type, you're probably going to gravitate to the Bay Area. If you're more business corporate type, there may be some things that are compelling about Seattle. And so I think we find that people, we wind up with a kind of similar group of people because of that selection bias. And that can be both good and bad for a number of reasons. But it also feels like other regions on the West Coast specifically they've been defined already. And Portland still feels like it's trying to figure out exactly what it is or what it wants to be. And I find that compelling as well and interesting. Like, we haven't really owned our own narrative. We don't really have a brand unless it's defined by somebody else. And so it's a kind of a constant creative work in progress. And I find that interesting as well.
Yeah.
That kind of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think you described that as kind of the blank space phenomenon. And like, it is kind of interesting thinking of how to see that blank space, because it is dependent on the person. I always think of like this idea that, like, three different people are looking in three different windows. One person sees the couch, one person sees the chair, one person sees the rug. Like, what's actually inside the house? Well, it depends on what you're looking at. It's like the blank space depends on like your sort of mindset and like who you are, like what problems you end up wanting to solve. But at the same time, like, eventually, like, the tech that you build is used by someone else. So like having some connection to like real problems that other people might be experiencing, like, takes that curiosity, takes that humility to be like, okay, but like, is this actually a problem we're solving on like a bigger scale? Maybe I need to go and look in another window to see, if
Yeah, totally.
if they need a chair, they already have one, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there's Portland, in my experience, tends to excel in the space between maybe the people building the product and the people using the product. Like, we're like engineers building tools for other engineers. Like, we're infrastructure plays or analytics plays or that kind of thing seem to be the spot that we tend to do best. And I think, to your point, it's because we're looking at both of those parties and being like, oh, what you do is great, but it's too hard in this specific area, and it's not delivering the right experience to the end user. And so we find ways to kind of fit in between there, be it with cybersecurity or kind of like APIs or piping or plumbing or that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, actually, I haven't thought about that as characterizing a lot of the startups in the area that have been pretty successful, but I agree with that statement that a lot of them tend to be like developer tools type focused.
Yeah.
I've been to a lot of tech events here too, and I can say that I am the only of the hosts actually living in the Portland area as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely agree with the humility part as well. I can probably count the number of times on one hand the times I've gone to a tech event and actually talked about anything tech related. Nobody actually talks about like, their job or what they do, or like if you ask somebody what they do for work, it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. Rather talk to you about my obscure like coffee roasting
Exactly. Let me talk to you
experience.
about my LP collection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I also love Portland for a lot of those reasons. So one of the things that we would like to know about is sort of your experience with supporting founders. I know you've done quite a bit with Pi. The Pi cookbook talks a lot about making mistakes. And I'm curious if that's something, is that like drawing from your own experience within your career about like, making mistakes and how it's important to do those to learn from them? Or how have you seen that play out with the founders that have gone through there?
That's super interesting. Yes, I have learned from my career. Like one of those, you sometimes have those random like things that just kind of stick with you forever and just kind of become a touch point, no matter how minuscule they may seem. Like I can still remember, like I was cleaning out my garage or something and came across a brochure. We used to do brochures. They were printed pieces of collateral that people would hold in their hand before we did all the digital things. And like it was a brochure I'd worked months and months and months on and really been like, painstaking work, tried to make it the perfect document possible. And I remember opening it up and seeing a typo on the first page. And it was just like one of those things. It was like, if I was so obsessive about this and that still got by me, then most people aren't noticing most mistakes we're making most of the time. And that really inspired me to and people come back sometimes and they're like, you told me to do this and it worked really well. So I kind of stick with it. It's like, just half-ass everything. Like, don't be so like, I have to be all in. I have to be perfect. I have to do whatever. Like, it's really been this, like, if you want to do something, don't worry about going all in, just try it. And you need to try things and experiment to figure out where your skills or expertise actually exist. And with founders, you kind of have to push them to do that because they're expected to do everything. Like, I think one of your recent conversations, the founder was talking about, like, I knew how to build product, but I didn't realize I had to do all these other things to be a founder. And you're never going to be perfect at all of those things. You're never going to be expert at all of those things, but you do want to try them or at least risk failing at them to figure out where the gaps in your knowledge are, where you can excel for the company. I have conversations with founders all the time where I'm, especially technical founders, where I'm like, are you sure you want to be the CEO of this? Like, do you want to just lead product or be the CTO maybe? And they're like, no, I totally want to be the CEO. I'm like, okay, but you don't get to do any of the fun stuff anymore. You have to do all that other stuff. And somebody else is going to be building product and doing the things that you enjoy. So much for startups and founders, apart from that experimentation, is helping them have the courage to fail so they can figure out where they can be successful, or to have them say, like, this isn't what I thought it was. Like, for me as a founder, it took years and years for me to figure out that I didn't want to be a founder. If I can help somebody else figure that out in 3 to 6 months, everybody wins, because that person's really focused on what they want to be doing and what they should be doing. But they would never know that if they didn't have the opportunity to try it, to experiment with what they were doing, and likely potentially fail, because that's mostly what startups do. Like, they just don't. So there's so many moving parts, and it's also like timing, which you have absolutely no control over. It's like the market has to be there. The idea has to be right for that market. Like, technology has to be at a right level for it to deliver in the right way. So many aspects of, what makes a company successful has absolutely nothing to do with the founder. So you just have to get used to that potential for failure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have never personally been a founder, but I've watched that journey a lot with my brother, who was at Pi. I think also Erika had a great point that we should probably define what Pi is for listeners.
Yeah. So Pi, at its very most basic, is just this ongoing experiment to figure out how more established organizations, like a corporation or an educational institution or maybe a government entity, can effectively collaborate with startups and startup founders for mutual benefit. So we don't want it to be a one-way thing. We want the established entity to be deriving value from it. We want the startups to be deriving value from it. We've been working on it for about 15 years. It started as a co-working space, and then really we kind of got into the situation where co-working is a hard model to begin with. And what we started to realize was if you're a co-working space, you have to take anybody who can pay for a desk, whether they're contributing to community or not. And then we're also encountering people who are like really great stewards of community who just couldn't afford co-working. And we're like, what are we doing here? This isn't the right model. And so we kind of pivoted into this startup accelerator model, which people throw that term around. It's basically just mentorship for startup founders over a very short period of time, usually accompanied with some investment of capital of some sort. And so we just continued to kind of iterate on that. We copied a few other models and kind of mucked around and put something together, and then continued to try different things. We originally started in SaaS mobile kind of stuff. The only thing that remained consistent year over year then was we really felt the shared workspace was valuable. We felt it was valuable to have founders around other founders for both peer support as well as just like emotional support. And then we learned a lot during the pandemic. We're like, this model does not work terribly well if it's not in a physical space. Like, the space itself does a lot of work that we didn't even realize it was doing. And we've also experimented not only with different organizations, but different participants, different types of products. So our original partner was Wieden & Kennedy. If people don't know who Wieden & Kennedy is, they're a global advertising firm that they came up with Just Do It. They're like the Old Spice guy and Coca-Cola polar bears and like that kind of stuff. And they really wanted to just learn more about innovation and technology. That's why they began the pursuit. We did a great program with Daimler. Daimler Trucks has a corporate presence here. We helped them build an internal accelerator for employees to address problems that were occurring in the corporation and use kind of startup thinking to solve things like that. And we experimented with like digital storytelling. So like what back then was AR, VR, XR kind of stuff, video game things. We have a partnership with Autodesk, which has a major Portland presence around manufacturing or founders who are building a physical object, ideally one with some electronics related to it, because they like figuring out like both the circuit boards and the housing. And so that was what motivated them to engage in that. And then for people who aren't familiar with Portland, one of my co-founders always refers to Oregon as the Silicon Valley of consumer products. We have more like footwear and apparel and food and beverage and coffee and blah, blah going on here than probably anywhere else on earth. And so we took the opportunity to focus on some consumer products companies and test the accelerator model with them as well. So it's really like, it's just a learning platform. It's a way of delivering education and mentorship. And we just always look for new ways to kind of leverage that to see what's possible.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that I've never really thought about Portland in that way as all of the consumer products, but there are quite a few here.
It's crazy.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, that's cool.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's
Nice.
like you obviously think of Nike just because it's such a presence, but like you just look a little bit below that, and it's like pretty much any major footwear company has some presence here. And then I'm stealing lines from Mitch Doherty, my co-founder, but he's also like, name another college stadium that's named after a potato salad and salsa company. Oregon State is Reese's. It's like, it's just like there are these random things where you're like, oh yeah, all of our regardless of how you feel about billionaires, all of our billionaires are consumer products people. They're apparel, footwear, coffee. Yeah, it's a really unique place in that.
Yeah. It sounds like it's been a really great community for founders to find a space, or anybody really in the startup community, which is awesome because that's something that we desperately need now. You've talked a little bit about the ups and downs associated with being a founder and how lonely and isolating that can be. Is there any part of Pi that sort of focuses on that, like on the mental health aspect of like making sure they have a support system built in?
Yeah, it did become more and more obvious to us that that was an actual issue. And we also had the opportunity to do some very directed work focused on women founders and BIPOC founders, where we found that was even exponentially more apparent than a bunch of white tech bros pretending they're founders. So like we really focused on making it as safe of a space as we could and ensuring that people felt comfortable sharing with one another. In Brad's cohort, it was our first one, and we actually encountered this issue where the company that Brad would eventually go to work for was like the superstar in that class. And they would show up to every like group meeting and they'd be like, oh, we just raised millions of dollars and we just launched this product. We just did this. And you'd see the rest of the class just go like, everybody be like, I didn't get anything done this week. So we had to like, that taught us that it's like, you have to put some guardrails in to say, we love it if you're doing great, but this is really about sharing your challenges and where you're finding difficulties. And we don't want to dismiss that progress, but there should always be some place where we're looking to improve or work on things. And we continue to kind of refine that model. A lot of my work as kind of just like herding cats, it tends to be like looking towards that negative space of being like, you've been checked out for 2 weeks. What's going on? Like, do we need to do something to help you? We had a little slush fund where it was like, anybody on staff could use it if they found a founder was struggling. Like we had a founder who was like he'd been working way too much, was burnout. We were sensing that like it just wasn't healthy. And so we were like, we're going to pay for a babysitter and dinner. Just go do that. Stop thinking about the startup and go do the thing. Just being open and present to like, these are people trying to build things and how do we support those people? I had also pursued, speaking of failures, I had also pursued something unsuccessfully that I still think has merit. I think so many programs like ours look for ways to aggregate services in benefit of the startup. So they'll be like, oh, here's a legal team, here's an accounting team, here's a design team. Like these are all the resources that you can use. We had pursued a grant to do the same thing with a professional therapist. Like we wanted to see like, if you brought therapy into this environment, would that make for more successful, resilient, kind of formidable founders and companies? We can never get anybody to quite buy off on the grant. Like we got positive feedback. We just couldn't finance it. But I was always curious to see also like which type of therapeutic environment would be best for found. Like, is it group therapy? Is it individual? Is it like what? So we wanted to test some of that stuff too. And I'm still of the mind that, if a founder is taking care of themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, they have a much better chance of being successful at what they want to do, but they have to have the time to do that. That can't be forcing them to do all the things. You have to like figure out how to structure that the right way. But it's the most corrosive. Like, I don't know why anybody does it. Being a founder is awful. Like it's the worst thing you could do to yourself. It adds so much stress, probably takes years, if not decades away from your life. It's just like, it seems it's such a shiny object and there's all this mythology around it about how great it is. And the reality is it's really hard. And that's what continues to motivate me day in and day out, is just like, it's not easy and no one knows what they're doing. And even the people who pretend they know what they're doing don't really know what they're doing. And so it's just a very unhealthy environment, but it is what it is.
I almost got the sense talking to Brad. We talked with Brittany's brother, who was a member of one of the cohorts, and a couple episodes back, I almost got the sense that it's something that he felt like he had to do rather than something he even wanted to. Yeah. So,
And I think that like, as Brad mentioned, like I love his trajectory because the company he came into Pi with failed. Like it failed, even though it launched with Google Drive. Like Google Drive used to think they were going to have an application ecosystem. And so Brad's company was one of the first companies on Google Drive. Like it had a successful launch. It just couldn't make it. And yeah, he comes up with an idea. He's like, I got to build this. And he also has, I think many people experience that. I think that's one of the challenges. Is part of the mythology is build it and they will come. I have to have the capability of building this product, and that draws a lot of people into starting something. And the reality is, if you simply want a product to exist, just go build that product. Like, just do that. Like, if you start a company to do it, then you're building a whole other thing in addition to building a product. So one of the things we always ask founders is like, do you want this product to exist, or are you trying to build a company? And the qualifying question there is, let's say we have to kill that product in order for this company to survive. Are you willing to kill that product, or is that just what you really want in the world? And that can be one of the things that helps people figure out if they're truly on kind of a startup founder trajectory, because startup founders want to build a business and they will figure out products that make that business successful, but the business is more important than the product. And then unfortunately, if they take that venture capital path, then making money becomes more the focus than even the business or the product. So yeah, there's a lot of messiness there as well.
It's really interesting. Well, with your wealth of experience in seeing so many of these startup journeys, what challenges do you see for startups now compared with when you first started in the space? And do you have any predictions on the future of challenges that founders might encounter?
I'll start with predictions because I'm really bad with predictions. I don't have any. I can still remember, like, I used to be on the internet when you had dial-up and you had to remember IP addresses to get to anything because there wasn't DNS really everywhere. And so I started seeing this dub folder showing up on some of my servers. I'm like, what's that? And people are like, oh, we're going to be able to put images and colors and things on the internet. I'm like, that's stupid. Text is enough. We're good. So don't take me for any predictions. And then I've forgotten the first part of your question, of course, because I went off the rails like an old man on my other thing.
Comparing challenges for startups that you noticed when you first started with challenges now, how is that different?
Yeah, mostly cultural, I guess is the best way to put it. Like when I started in startups, even into the early Pi days, you were still crazy to be starting a company. Like people would be like, why don't you just go get a job? Like, why are you starting a thing? That's dumb. And so like today, it's like, well, today every kid coming up through the system wants to be a creator or YouTuber or whatever. But startups are part of popular culture. And we've had 15 years of Shark Tank, constantly feeding people that, oh, you should start a company and do a thing. And I think that's become a whole new challenge because of that mythology. So, when we started, it was hard because nobody thought you should be doing that. And now we exist in a world where everybody's like, well, if you're not doing a startup or a side project, are you even really doing anything? And so there've been a lot more people in the industry and a lot more folks struggling with things than they did in the past. I think, the other part of it is, and this is not meant to be negative or dismissive, it's a lot easier to build a product these days than it was before. And so that can also be something that kind of leads to issues and problems. I mean, when somebody even with my lack of technical acumen can spend some time with Claude or ChatGPT and code up enough of a thing that works well enough to do the thing I need it to do. Like that's also kind of almost a garbage in, garbage out problem. It's like because the barrier is so low, people may think they have an idea that's viable that's not really an idea that's viable. And so the bigger challenges now are educational, dissuading people from taking the track they think they need to take because of what they've heard, because of what goes on in the industry. It's still, no matter what people say, it's still hard to raise money. It's still hard to build a company. It's still hard to build a good product. And I heard something really good from a venture capitalist here in town named Diane Freeman, who works at Voyager, the other day. I thought it was a really important point. Like, no matter how easy it gets to build product, raise money, what have you, you still have to sell the thing and somebody still has to buy the thing. So like that remains like a huge friction point that will remain hard forever, even if it's, giving your agent your credit card so it can go buy something. It still needs to be buying something and somebody still needs to be selling it. So it's like there's just all kinds of facets where one part of it, as one part seems to get easier, the other part seems to get harder, and it always kind of balances out. There's always something hard. There's always something that's slightly easier. And, it's just kind of trying to stay up to date on where those areas of conflict or friction are is the work we try and do with our programs, or that we try and bring other founders in and say, based on their experience, like, here's what you might find difficult, kind of thing.
It definitely makes sense. And it's cool that you have a model that will continue to evolve with those challenges as you're moving forward as well. So really, really awesome to hear about all the knowledge you've built up around startups and founders and dive into that. We are coming up at time, but we typically do a fun segment. So the segment we have today is called Local Gems. So since you're passionate about your community, I would love to go around and suggest local gems you'd recommend for anyone visiting your city, like restaurant, activity, anything in between. As per usual, we'll let you go last so you have some time to think about it. But I guess I'll go first. So I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it struggles with the same thing of, I think, finding its identity and trying to figure out who it is, what it is in this, as it's growing up. But I would say one of my favorite things in Charlotte is Camp North End, which is used to be like an industrial mill, and they revitalized it to have a lot of local small businesses and incubate those small businesses, which I really love. There's a lot of chains coming into Charlotte, which is fine. It happens, but I really love that there's a space to really grow what's special to our community, and it's walkable. They plant natural native wildflowers and things, and it's just a really lovely space. All right, I'll pass it off to Brittany so we split up the Portland Rex.
Great. My best recommendation that I always give to folks is this is probably really overrated actually for Portland. I feel like it's really common, but to go to Powell's City of Books. It's an independent bookstore based in Portland, and there's a few locations in Portland. I'm not sure if it's extended outside of there, but I know you can also order from them online. And it is just one of the coolest, if you like reading, one of the coolest places to go in the world, in my opinion. It's, I think, 4 stories tall, and it's just filled with books. They have a rare book room, which is so cool to walk through, and it's a very satisfying place to walk around. And they also have some really great, touristy, off the wall sort of touristy things if you want to buy, magnets that aren't just the I Heart Oregon magnets or whatever, then it's a good spot to go for that too. So that's my recommendation.
I am not a San Diego native. And so I moved here, what is it, 6 years ago now? But I feel like I'm still discovering a lot of my favorite gems. I think currently, we've been taking Isabel to the aquarium a lot, which is sort of a sleeper hit because it's really small. San Diego's known for its zoo, which is gigantic and is amazing. But the aquarium is really small and sweet. And in the summer, they're open late. So we'll go and walk around and she can like see all the fishes and pet the starfish and then like get an ice cream cone afterwards. And it's like been a really lovely like experience for her as a toddler and us as like, parents trying to corral an energetic and curious kid through the world. Yeah, she especially loves the turtles. And I think last time we went, she spent about like 15 minutes outside the turtle tank. Like they have like a little ledge, and she was like walking back and forth and like singing a song outside the turtle tank. I was like, well, that's my child. Guilty. Good times.
Seconding Powell's. Powell's is just like, it's a full city block of books, like all used. I think they sell some new, but it's a used bookstore. So definitely that. If you come here with kids, go to OMSI. Like it's the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. And I think in most cities, the museum that's central to the city is an art museum. And for us, it's really OMSI, which is experimental and fun. But to pick if you can't go wrong. Like every 5 blocks is a new neighborhood in Portland full of like great restaurants and coffee shops and those kind of things. So it's really hard for me to pick a favorite, but I would say the quintessential coffee shop for Portland right now for me is Deadstock, because it's a sneaker themed coffee shop that was started by a former Nike shoe engineer. And it's just really one of those where it's such an interesting cross-section of a town that tends to be very siloed in its creative pursuits. Like tons of great food people, but they don't necessarily cross over with the shoe people, or they don't cross over with the artists or whatever. And so it's just always nice to see that those two things collide in that place. And they're always everybody from like, you run into elected officials to like famous people who just happen to be in there. It's just a really interesting place. So I always recommend Deadstock.
Oh, that sounds so cool. Well, I see we should have a Portland meetup in our future, it sounds like.
Definitely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Rick. That was an awesome conversation, really interesting. Where can people find you online?
I'm on the internet, like usually under my last name, which is notoriously hard to spell. But like Twitter used to be my big thing, and now like it kind of lost the juice. So like, unfortunately, it's like LinkedIn, or Brittany and I are trying to make Blue Sky work. We're putting our energy into the Blue Sky. So I'm on there too, but generally I'm on most of the socials. And if you're watching this on the YouTube, I'm also on the YouTube on a regular basis.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for tuning into Overcommitted. If you like what you hear, please do follow, subscribe, or do whatever it is you like to do on the podcast app of your choice. Check us out on Blue Sky as well, and share with your friends. Until next week, goodbye.